Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the York Civil War Roundtable. I have to check the date. Today is February 17th, 2021. So here we are, 3 Wednesdays deep in February. My name is Adam Bentz, and I am the Assistant Director of Library and Archives at the History Center. We have a great program tonight. We're really looking forward to it. But if you can bear with me, I'd like to go through some brief announcements, as brief as we can make them. The first thing I'd like to talk about, actually what I need to do is make everybody be able to see these. First thing I'd like to talk about is something we're very happy to announce. We've been working on it for some time. Actually, one of our library team members has been working on it for some time. And this is a GIS story map about the Underground Railroad in York County, and also touching on some surrounding areas that are related to the move north for people, for escaped slaves who are trying to seek freedom. So I can try to come up with things to say here, but it's much better to just show you. This is something that we have now made accessible through our website. And like I said, this is prepared by a library team member, Brian Bailey, who is our registrar. And he put this together in coordination with Scott Mingus, who most of you know very well. Scott Mingus, again, is the author of The Ground Swallowed Them Up, Slavery and the Underground Railroad in York County, Pennsylvania, in addition to dozens of other works on the Civil War in York County and other places. So Brian and Scott have been working on this for some time. And let me show you where you can find us. I'm just going to stop our share briefly here. And need to switch back. There we go. So if you go to our History Center page, you will see under museums, there is now a link for Following Freedom, the Underground Railroad in York County. So that's where the link is. And if you scroll down and take a look at this very brief introduction we have, this blue link will take you to this page, which I hope everybody's seeing with me here tonight. Thank you very much, Peter. I don't often share things through the web. Most of our stuff is done through PowerPoint, but just trying to show you exactly what we have up here. So this is what Brian's been working on for several months, and there's a lot of text. So if you're not too familiar, if you haven't read Scott's book, there's a lot of great background information here about the overall history of the Underground Railroad, why it was important in American history, but also the very important role that York County and many people played in this very important event and this period of great national division that came in the decades before the Civil War. And as you're probably familiar from previous presentations we've done here, York County was divided over the subject of slavery and what to do about it. But in any event, please take a look at this project. There is a great map that we have here, which offers possible routes that what we call freedom seekers were able to do on their route north from Maryland and other states in what became the Confederacy. So that is one section, and then it gets really interesting. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see that we have a number of different particular sites that are known, factually proven, to have been stops on the Underground Railroad. And by clicking on these different places on the map, you can actually tour these different places. Columbia, probably familiar to many of you as a place at which escaping slaves, many of them would arrive in Columbia and feel like they had really made it, because getting across the Susquehanna was a major accomplishment. Of course, right across the river in York County, Wrightsville, surprisingly an interesting place, because not only was it home to stations of the Underground Railroad, but also was a place where slave catchers liked to hang out because they knew it was an important destination. So just to show you how that works, click on these different sites. You can cycle through and see some archival photographs and other materials we have at the History Center related to these different sites. In addition, this map is the GIS part of the presentation of the exhibit, but if you scroll down, there is a very detailed discussion of the overall historical significance of the Underground Railroad, as well as a series of, I wouldn't say necessarily exhaustive, but certainly thorough biographies of many of the individuals, William Goodrich, who made the Underground Railroad possible in York County. So please give this a look in your free time. Again, this is available on our website. If you go to yorkhistorycenter.org and click the museum tab, if you'll scroll down, you will see the title of this exhibit. Again, it's called Following Freedom, the Underground Railroad in York County. Okay, and now I will try to transition back here into what we need for tonight. There we go. Okay, moving ahead, as we usually like to do, we're going to talk about some upcoming events. Obviously, tonight we are here to hear from Peter Miele, who will be talking in a few minutes. So that's what we're doing on the 17th. I always like to have today's presentation up just in case people are unsure of where we are. So just joking a bit there. Okay. So coming up on February 23rd, that's Tuesday at 11 a.m. And all of these events, I think, unfortunately, it doesn't even have to be said at this point. These are all virtual events available through Zoom, registration through Zoom, or we're going to put them on Facebook Live. So anyway, February 23rd, we will be featuring another of our series of 18th century cooking demonstrations. This will be done by Christine Cooper, who is the manager of public programs at the History Center, and she'll be working in our summer kitchen. This month's theme, if you're interested in checking this out, is nursery rhyme food. I can't tell you anything about that, but it sounds interesting. I had to think of some nursery rhymes to figure out what she might be working on. All right, and yours truly did not check his dates on this presentation to put the 23rd after the 18th, which is how it's usually done. The 18th is tomorrow, and it's Thursday, our third Thursday talk, which will be happening on Zoom. I will also be participating in this as a co-host. So we will be welcoming historian Mark Edward Lender to the History Center virtually to discuss his book, Cabal, The Plot Against General Washington. And I have read this book. It's very interesting. There is a very well-known series of legends about the cabal against Washington that took place actually in the city of York during Congress's stay in 1777, 1778. Unfortunately, a lot of those things are inaccurate or exaggerated. However, Dr. Lender will be discussing what really took place, what Congress actually was up to in questioning Washington's authority, and the machinations of the Board of War, which is trying to take away a little bit of his authority. Not a little bit, actually, quite a bit of it. Washington won, needless to say, an astute politician as well as an astute general. So please join us a day from now, tomorrow night at 7 p.m. We'll be doing a third Thursday talk with Mark Edward Lender. All right. Now, going back chronologically, let's go to February 27th. That is 2 Saturdays from now. This will be taking place at 1 p.m. virtually, and we will be welcoming Myra and Nisi DeShields, who will be talking about Researching African American Genealogy. And specifically, her presentation is entitled The Ancestors I Met on My Genealogy Journey. So please note that if you're interested in genealogy and exploring that topic, please join us in 2 Saturdays from now. And the final topic I will get to before discussing next month's roundtable will be taking place on March 4th. That's Thursday night at 7 p.m. Our believe it's quarterly. Our quarterly writers roundtable will be taking place virtually, and we will be welcoming Tom Davidson, who is an originator of an organization called Lincoln Highway Legacy. And Tom has done a lot of research into the history of the Lincoln Highway. If you've never heard of it before, it's basically what is today Route 462, or what used to be Route 30. It stretches all the way across the United States, and it took quite a lot of effort on the local level, state level, and national level to get the Lincoln Highway to come into existence back in the 1910s. So Tom will be talking about the local efforts of boosters and businessmen to get York County to participate in this. Excuse me for my phone. I'll turn that off. All right, now let's talk about next week, and then I will introduce our speaker. So on March 17th, a month from now, we'll be having our March Civil War Roundtable, and it's perfectly timed. I really have to give Roundtable volunteers a hand of applause for this, because it's timed in perfectly with St. Patrick's Day. We will be welcoming Chris Army and Rick Schroeder, who are both licensed battlefield guides at Gettysburg, and they will be presenting the Irish Brigade, the Fearless Sons of Erin. As I said, timed perfectly for St. Patrick's Day, they're going to talk about this brigade of immigrants, including commanders, participants, and some of the major battles in which the Sons of Erin participated. Ultimately, the horrific casualties suffered in various battlefields left this brigade decimated, especially Fredericksburg, as many of you are aware. While the writings and information we have in the Irish Brigade are not prolific, their spirit lives on in the monumentation and in the stories from the battlefield. So come, join us in a month's time and celebrate the deeds of the Fighting Irish. I did not write this. This is a great introduction to the presentation. I'm very excited for it. But without further ado, tonight's speaker, Peter Miele, I will introduce him. We're very happy to have him here. He has served as Executive Director of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center since May 2020. Born and raised in northern New Jersey, Miele received a BA in History and Secondary Education from Ramapo College in New Jersey in 2011. He taught for several years before relocating to Gettysburg, where he began work at Seminary Ridge as a Visitor Services Assistant in 2013. In 2014, he earned an MA in Applied History from Shippensburg, where he has also worked as an adjunct instructor. Miele serves on the boards of Main Street Gettysburg, the Civil War Roundtable of Gettysburg, and the Gettysburg-Adams County Torch Club. A frequent lecturer, Miele has presented at national conferences for the Society of Civil War Historians, the American Association for State and Local History, the National Council for Social Studies, and the American Battlefield Trust. His work has explored the effects of World War I camps in Gettysburg, and he is currently working on a research project situating the Gettysburg campaign in the context of a humanitarian crisis, which sounds really great, and maybe he can come back and talk to us about that at some point in the future. As always, I ask that people hold on to their questions. You can put them into the chat feature. That's really the best way, and I will be monitoring them during Peter's presentation tonight. And then we will try to get to everything at the end tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Peter to unmute, and I will stop sharing, and I will turn over the roundtable.
Thanks very much, Adam. It's really nice, really great to be here. It's even nicer to have somebody else who's running the technical side of things. I am on the board of the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable, and it's my job every month to produce the the virtual meetings. We've been doing that since April. And last month, I had the honor of both producing and presenting, which has its own set of challenges. So thank you, Adam, for being here this evening and taking those technical production duties off of my shoulders. So I am going to share my screen here. And we will begin. We're good? Okay.
Looks great.
So, like many of you, I spent a lot of time on the Gettysburg battlefield. And one of my favorite places to visit and to walk is the high water mark. And I spend a lot of time there, as probably many people in this audience this evening do. And I always pass these two structures, and it gives me pause to think that in a site of unimaginable carnage during the Battle of Gettysburg, the high tide of the Confederate Army crested on a black man's farm. This is, of course, the farm of Abraham Bryan, a free black man who lived on Cemetery Ridge, had fled his home in the face of the oncoming Confederate Army and came back to his home in ruins. A lot of people may just pass this by. I know before I moved to Gettysburg and I would come and tour the battlefield that there would be plenty of times where I would just go right past these structures and not think about what they were. And in my mind, that's really part of the story that we're going to tell here this evening, is that history is made up of layers, and everything that we're going to be talking about this evening are layers. The events are there, some historic sites, historic markers are there, and it's about peeling back those layers and looking at the stories that maybe are lurking just beneath the surface. You need to know where these stories are hidden. The program that I'm going to give tonight, we're going to do tonight, actually was the last program that I presented live before the pandemic. Last February, I did this presentation twice. Haven't done it since. This is going to be the first time I'm presenting virtually. But this presentation started, believe it or not, in a meeting that I had a few years ago with some representatives of an organization in Philadelphia. We started talking about Black history in this area, and I just started rattling off sites and events that I had learned about over the years. And I said, you know, this really needs a tour. And it clicked in my head. Yes, it does need a tour. So back in fall of 2019, we organized a bus tour for Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, where we actually spent a day visiting these sites. And we turned it into a PowerPoint, and really it only scratches the surface of some of these stories. And there are going to be stories that I tell tonight that maybe you've heard of. There are going to be some stories that maybe I leave out. And what that does is it just shows the wide breadth of stories that are out there and that need to be uncovered and unlayered and brought up to the surface. We're really going to focus this evening on a period of about 25 years between 1840 and 1865, where Black people in the area are moving to a position of human agency and moving towards fighting for their freedom as a result of the Civil War. And that's sort of where we're going to end our story this evening, out in Mercersburg in the 54th Massachusetts. But we're going to tell some stories along the way that look at this area as a battleground. And that's what I really like to think of South Central Pennsylvania as, between 1780 with the passage of Pennsylvania's Gradual Emancipation Act and the end of the Civil War in 1865. This area is a battleground. I call it the battleground before the battleground, because there are these fights that are going on over the institution of slavery, over what it means to be a free human being, that are going to permeate this area for 85 years. And one of the interesting things about this area, and I was just looking this up today, is that the border between Maryland, slave state, and Pennsylvania, free state, is a purely arbitrary, not necessarily arbitrary, but a purely political border. And you look at the other boundaries between northern states and southern states as you move further west, and you have the Ohio River that's making up the northern border of Kentucky, southern borders of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. So you have a natural border between free and slave states. Here you have no natural border. It's a line that was surveyed by Mason and Dixon back in the 18th century, and that's what determines what is enslaved and what is free going into the 19th century. So a very, very interesting area. So no discussion of slavery in Pennsylvania can begin without talking about the Quaker influence on this state. And we're going to start our story way back in 1688 with the Germantown Petition. And this is the first fight for equal rights in the American colonies. This is penned by, I believe it's 4 Quakers out in the Philadelphia, in the Germantown, what's now the Germantown area of Philadelphia. And I'll just read a few lines from it. There is a saying that we shall do to all men like we will be done ourselves, making no difference of what generation, descent, or color they are. To bring men hither, or to rob and sell them against their will, we stand against. And the Quakers are going to play a very important role, both in theory and then practically, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, from the period of the 17th century all the way through 1865. Originally, slavery was not outlawed by the Quakers or the Society of Friends, but over time, between the 1750s and the 1770s, there's a movement within the Quakers to outlaw slavery. First, they start by disciplining any friend who owns slaves, then moving to outlaw slavery in the Friends Society of Friends by 1774. And the reason is because they don't agree with the brutality inherent in the slave system and believe that it goes against the pacifism that the Friends value very highly. So that's sort of at the higher theoretical level. And then practically, we'll talk about men like William Wright, who I was happy to see was on that really amazing looking resource that Adam shared at the beginning of this. But I want to just show a couple of maps here and talk about the area that we're going to be focusing on this evening. This is from a 2001 book called The Underground Railroad in Pennsylvania. And I want to zoom in on the portion that we're going to really be looking at tonight. Sites north and west of Gettysburg. And as I said, there are many other stories to be told, and I had envisioned this as a tour. I actually envisioned it as a 2-part tour, and we did part 1 back in fall of 2019. We did sites north and west of Gettysburg, but there's a whole nother tour that could be sites east of Gettysburg, through York County, through Lancaster, Chester, and even really to the outskirts of Philadelphia. And that's something that I would like to do as we move forward. So I want to start in Quaker Valley, just north of Gettysburg, north of Biglerville, and Quaker Valley is really the ground zero of the anti-slavery and abolition and Underground Railroad movement in Adams County. And you'll see there a photo, an engraving up in the top left corner. It's a man named William Wright. And William Wright is one of the best known conductors on the Underground Railroad in Quaker Valley in Adams County. And you see a lot of interracial and intermarriage occurring between working together on the Underground Railroad. William Wright is married to a woman named Phoebe Werriman. Phoebe's brother is very much involved in the anti-slavery movement in this area. They work with a man named Edward Matthews from an area known as Quaker Hill, a black man who lives there with his family, helping to shepherd people north on the Underground Railroad. So there's a lot of working together to make this work in the Quaker Valley area. But Quaker Valley is also the site of one of the most heinous crimes to occur in this area at this time, and that is the kidnapping of a family, a woman named Catherine or Kitty Payne and her children. And it occurs on the night of July 23rd, 1845. And a wagon pulls up in front of the Elkhorn Hotel, which you'll see there is still there today in Bendersville. And the men get off their horses, get into a wagon, and go up Bear Mountain under cover of darkness. And they burst into a cabin where Kitty and her 3 children are sleeping soundly. They bind and gag and force the family into a wagon, and they are back in Maryland before the sun is up. Now, how did this story begin? Well, Catherine Payne was born as an enslaved person in Rappahannock County, Virginia, and her master, Samuel Maddox, dies, leaving his estate to his widow, Mary. Now, upon Mary's death, the estate is going to go to the nephew, Samuel Jr. Well, Mary recognizes that Samuel Jr. is running his uncle's estate into the ground. And Mary is afraid that he is going to sell off the enslaved people to pay off his debts. Mary gives Samuel the farm and then takes the enslaved people north into Pennsylvania, including Catherine and her family, and frees them up here in Adams County. Catherine Payne lives for a while around the Mariah Furnace out near Fairfield, but then moves up to Bendersville, where she takes on a job as a laundress. Well, as you could imagine, Samuel is pretty upset with his aunt. He thinks that she had no right to sell the property that was eventually going to come to him. So Samuel hires a slave catcher, Thomas Finnegan, and they find the whereabouts of Catherine Payne and her family. They come up through Gettysburg, through Biglerville to Bendersville. They find where she is, and they burst into the cabin and take her south. This touches off 2 court cases. One of them is going to be whether or not Thomas Finnegan, the head slave catcher, actually was guilty of kidnapping, which eventually he is found guilty of kidnapping and is sentenced to 5 years of hard service at Eastern State Penitentiary, only serves 1. But the second and maybe more important case is what's going to happen to the Payne family. They're taken back to Rappahannock County, Virginia. They're put into protective custody. And a court case begins over whether or not Mary Maddox had the right to free these enslaved people. Eventually, on a technicality, the case is adjudicated in the favor of the Payne family, and they are set free. Mary did have the right to free the family and bring them north, and Samuel Maddox Jr. loses the case. Well, the Payne family now has to make their way back into Pennsylvania. It takes them 6 months on foot, stopping along the way, staying at people's homes. For a while, they stay in the home of William Wright. Catherine Payne marries Abraham Bryan in 1847. But by 1851, she is dead. And all of this had happened, remember, in 1845-46. So she only gets to live in freedom for about 5 years, unfortunately. But you can see there in the newspaper article from one of the Gettysburg newspapers that I have up on the screen that it was called a gross outrage. And there were people in the Society of Friends and the Quakers who recognized how horrible this was, and were working to try to get Catherine Payne to freedom. There was work being done by Quakers on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line to try to work for Catherine Payne's freedom, which of course they eventually get. But what this shows to me is really the tenuous freedom that exists here on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line in the 1840s, that you could technically or officially be free and be living in Pennsylvania, but that does not mean that you are by any stretch of the imagination out of danger, as we've seen in this case. And there are other cases, if you look, like Mag Palm, who's kidnapped almost kidnapped in 1858 in Gettysburg, that being in a free state did not necessarily mean that you are free. As we move north, hang on. We're going to move north from Bendersville up into Cumberland County to the village of Boiling Springs. This is another node on the Underground Railroad, and on the morning of October 24th, 1847, that man there that you see at the bottom left-hand corner, a man named Daniel Kaufman, he's waking up, he's getting ready to start his day, and he hears a knock on his door. And he opens the door and he sees a man there that we're unsure if he knew, but a black man is standing in front of him, and he beckons Daniel Kaufman to come out to Kaufman's barn. And as he gets there, he sees that this man, George Cole, has hidden away a family of freedom seekers, 13 freedom seekers, in Kaufman's barn. Now, Kaufman was known as a man on the a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but he was not really happy to see that George Cole had placed these freedom seekers in his barn without his permission. And they get into a little bit of an argument, and Kaufman says, no, you have to take these men and women away. And George Cole says, well, I really have nowhere to take them. And they go back and forth for a little bit, and eventually Daniel Kaufman says, okay, they can stay for the day. Well, Boiling Springs, if you've ever been there, is not the largest town, and word gets out pretty quickly that that there are 13 freedom seekers hiding in the barn of Daniel Kaufman. And throughout the day, people from town come to see these men and women that are hiding out in Kaufman's barn and start to talk to them and interact with them. So it's not really the biggest secret. Well, that evening, under cover of darkness, these freedom seekers are loaded into a wagon that's owned by Kaufman. It's unclear whether or not Kaufman was driving the wagon, but these men and women are spirited north of the Susquehanna River, and as far as we know, they end up in freedom. But that's not where the story ends for old Dan Kaufman here. Remember, the Underground Railroad is very much in secret. It's not really written down. It's word of mouth, families working together, stories being handed down from generation. But one of the reasons that we do know so much about the Underground Railroad is when people get caught. And that's unfortunately what happens to Daniel Kaufman. The nephew of the owner of these freedom seekers, a man named John Stake, cousin of the owner, Mary Oliver, a man named John Stake, tracks these freedom seekers from Williamsport, Maryland, up through Chambersburg and to Boiling Springs to the home of Daniel Kaufman. And for a while, Kaufman's neighbors keep their mouth shut, don't say anything. But eventually, one of the neighbors, a brother-in-law, in fact, of Daniel, speaks out. He is threatened, and he says, no, it was Dan Kaufman that hid these freedom seekers. Well, Kaufman is going to go through a pretty sizable legal battle. And he is first tried in the Cumberland County Court of Common Pleas. They find him as a link in the chain of these freedom seekers going north, and fine him $2,000. They convict him of violating the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. This case is appealed, goes to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they say, by giving a cup of water and some food and some transportation does not mean that Kaufman got these freedom seekers, tried to get these freedom seekers to escape. He was just helping them along the way. And if they had been hurt or if they had died on his land, he would have been responsible. So he really should not be held accountable for just giving them a little of assistance and sending them along their way. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court also says that this was a federal issue. It never should have been tried in the Cumberland County Court of Common Pleas. Case goes to the U.S. District Court from there in Philadelphia, and one of Kaufman's legal team happens to be Thaddeus Stevens. Well, in this case, Daniel Kaufman is found guilty. Overall, he is fined about $2,800, $1,100 in legal fees, about $5,000 altogether. One of his other brothers-in-law who shared Kaufman's anti-slavery views puts up some of the money, but then donations pour in from around the nation to help pay for Dan Kaufman's legal fees. One of the most interesting things about Dan Kaufman and his situation here is the national coverage that that this case gets. And I just want to read two articles. One is from the Salem, Ohio newspaper. It's called The Martyr Kaufman, published in December of 1853. It seems to me that something should be done to save him from being reduced to want. I would not let the pro-slavery monsters have the pleasure of thinking that they have either ruined a man for harboring a fugitive or frightened others from imitating his example. Now, the Natchez, Mississippi Courier had a decidedly different view of Kaufman, 1848. It is to be hoped that this salutary judgment will have a tendency to prevent these fanatical depredators from preying upon the rights and property of citizens of other states. Their pretended philosophy will all vanish the moment they are compelled to pay for its unlawful exercise. So wide coverage of a case that happened in Little Boiling Springs in Cumberland County. As Daniel Kaufman is fighting these legal battles in Pennsylvania, his brother, David Kaufman, is a representative from the new state of Texas, where he is giving speeches supporting the slave question, as you can see from this pamphlet. So very interesting family dynamics. David Kaufman, like his brother Daniel, was born in Cumberland County, but heads off to Texas and ends up running for Congress and being elected to Congress from there. Daniel Kaufman's home is still there in Boiling Springs today, has a historic marker, as you can see on this slide right here. The home that has the historic marker is not the farm where he hid the freedom seekers. The home today is right across from Children's Lake, right there on Front Street in Boiling Springs. But the farm was closer to where the Boiling Springs pool is today. If you go out Race Street and then head out like you're going back to Mount Holly Springs, Daniel Kaufman's farm was on the left. He didn't build the house until much later. So from Boiling Springs, I want to move down the spine of South Mountain, down through Michaud State Forest, another node on the Underground Railroad freedom seekers going north along the area, what today would be 233, along by Pine Grove Furnace. And I want to take a stop just briefly at Caledonia Furnace. And I don't want to dwell too much on the story here, because this is one of those well-known stories. But the Caledonia Iron Furnace, of course, is owned by Thaddeus Stevens, who uses it as a stop on the Underground Railroad. And there's some evidence, some scholars have made the suggestion that one of the reasons that Thaddeus Stevens keeps the Caledonia Iron Furnace in operation for so long at a loss is because he was using it as a stop on the Underground Railroad. And there's a man named Hiram Wirtz who lives in Quincy, which is down if you're going towards Waynesboro on 997. Today, that was where Hiram Wirtz lived, and he was a conductor on the Underground Railroad who would take, who self-professed that he would take freedom seekers from Rouserville through Quincy up to the Caledonia Iron Furnace to the area known as Little Africa, just west of the Caledonia Iron Furnace, where they would receive aid and be taken further north. So there are a couple of accounts that talk about Caledonia being one of those stops on the Underground Railroad. But I want to focus more on Franklin County and Chambersburg. And Franklin County, during the 1860 census, 1,788 people in Franklin County identified as Black or of mixed race, which is the fifth highest percentage in a county percentage in the state of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it's in Chambersburg that two critical figures in the Civil War era have their very last meeting. And this is Frederick Douglass and John Brown. Now, Frederick Douglass and John Brown had met years earlier. Frederick Douglass writes the best account of his relationship with John Brown. They met in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1847. Douglass had kept hearing about this man, John Brown, and people said, you have to meet John Brown. So Brown was living in Springfield, and Douglass happened to be there, and he calls on John Brown. And one of the things that Douglass writes about that's so surprising is the austerity in which Brown and his family live. But early in that meeting, Brown starts to lay out his plan for a slaughter of slave masters, and that's an exact quote from Douglass's recollection. He wanted to use the Allegheny Mountains as an escape route from the deep south up to the north and towards Canada to help freedom seekers move through the mountains and to freedom. He does not at this point say anything about Harper's Ferry. Douglass is a little concerned. He has some reservations about this, but he does believe that Brown is serious, that he believes Brown's resolve. So over the next 10 years or so, 12 years, the two men would meet when they were in Springfield, Massachusetts, where Brown was living, or Rochester, New York, where Douglass was living. After Bleeding Kansas in 1856, Brown comes and stays with Douglass in Rochester for several weeks, and he works on correspondence with some backers and plans out a constitution for his provisional government. In the summer of 1859, Brown shows up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, disguised as Isaac Smith. He says he's into mining, but he's really using Chambersburg as a forward station to attract supplies for the eventual attack on Harper's Ferry. And in August of 1859, he invites Frederick Douglass to come to Chambersburg to meet with him. Well, by this time, Frederick Douglass, of course, is a very well-known orator, and Frederick Douglass shows up at the train station, and people are very surprised, and he gives a speech, and nobody really knows why he is there, what his real reason is. And they're going to meet actually in a quarry just to the west of town. You can see here on this map, and there is a historic marker where the two men meet in this quarry. And Frederick Douglass, again, leaves a great account of meeting Brown here in Chambersburg. He approaches him very cautiously, even in broad daylight, and he says that Brown is disguised as a fisherman with a storm-beaten hat and clothing about the color of the quarry itself. Brown has grown the beard that we know him to have, and Douglass says he looked really like a man of the neighborhood. It's at this point that Brown tells Douglass that the reason that he is in Chambersburg is that he is going to attack the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry. Now, Douglass had heard this a little bit before. Brown had started over the years talking about Harper's Ferry, but Douglass really thinks that this is all bluster. But here he realizes that Brown is being serious. And Douglass tries to talk him out of it, quote, with all the arguments at my command. Brown replies that something needs to be done, and Douglass says, well, Virginia will blow you and your hostages sky high. For 2 days, Douglass and Brown's Secretary of War, John Kagi, a friend of Douglass's, Shields Green, sit in this quarry and debate the merits of Brown's plan. Douglass pleading with him to call it off, to try something else, and Brown not budging. At the end of 2 days, Douglass realizes that this is going to be a futile effort and gets up to leave. He beckons Shields Green to come with him, and Shields said, no, I'm going to go with Brown. And Shields Green goes, and he is killed at Harper's Ferry. Brown wanted Douglass to come with him too, and Douglass just wouldn't have it. Douglass is in Philadelphia in October of 1859 when Brown carries out the attack on Harper's Ferry. Douglass flees across New Jersey to New York, makes his way back to Rochester, New York, realizes that he has a copy of Brown's Provisional Constitution in his desk drawer in Rochester, New York, and gets his son to get it out of the desk and destroy it. Douglas gets on a boat and heads to Europe, and is actually on the way on the Atlantic when Douglas, or on his way to Europe, if not there, by the time that John Brown is hanged on December 2nd, 1859. In fact, the governor of Virginia wrote a letter to James Buchanan asking to hand over Frederick Douglass because of his complicity, or suspected complicity, in the attack on Harper's Ferry. From Chambersburg, I want to move on towards Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, which is really in that bottom left-hand corner of Franklin County. And as the war erupts in 1861, and African Americans are permitted to enlist in 1863, Franklin County becomes really this hotbed of recruiting. And really, in this corner of the county, you start to see men from Mercersburg join regiments like the 54th Massachusetts and the United States Colored Troops. And in Mercersburg today, there's a cemetery, Zion Union Cemetery, which has the highest number of soldiers from the 54th Massachusetts, the regiment that's made famous, of course, by the movie Glory. Has the highest number of soldiers in the 54th in a private cemetery. And I want to read. It's sort of a long quote, but I think it begs some reading here about why men from the Mercersburg area joined the 54th Massachusetts. This is from an address by Reverend J.G. Rose, pastor emeritus of the Presbyterian Church, and this is from years after the Civil War. They knew what it was for them and their families to flee to the mountains or hide in the cellars and garrets and caves for safety when Confederate soldiers raided the neighborhood. They now knew that union and freedom, or disunion and slavery, one or the other, would be the final issue of the war. It was under these circumstances that our colored boys learned that Massachusetts was enlisting a regiment of colored troops for active war service. This was their opportunity. It was a test of their spirit and courage. The decision that they made then transformed them from boyhood into sturdy manhood. So as men are being recruited for the 54th Massachusetts in Massachusetts, there is not enough return. There are not enough men of African-American men of military age in Massachusetts. So recruiters are sent all across to different states to try to recruit men, and they come into Pennsylvania and are recruiting men from Chambersburg, recruiting men from Mercersburg, Columbia, as we saw earlier in the new storyboard, and Mercersburg is second only to Philadelphia in recruiting men for the 54th Massachusetts. Overall, Pennsylvania sends 394 men to the 54th Massachusetts, which is more than any other state. And you can see here, I did not take this beautiful picture, but you can see this here. This is the state marker there. And I want to talk just briefly about what these men are fighting for. And there are some great letters that are on a project called Valley of the Shadow, which is a resource that has been up for many, many years. And there's a collection of letters from the Christie and the Demas family. And I want to read a letter here from Jacob Christie, just an excerpt. We have been fighting as brave as ever was any soldiers fought. I know if every regiment that are out and have been out would have done as well as we have in the war, the war would be over. I really do think that it's God's will that this war shall not end till the colored people get their rights, and it goes very hard for the white people to think of it, but by God's will and power, they will have their rights. Us that are living now may not live to see it. I shall die trying for our rights so that others that are born hereafter may live a long and happy life. And I want to finish. This was one grave that when I was out at Zion Union Cemetery a few years ago, it just really struck me, the grave of Corporal Hezekiah Watson. And one of the reasons that this grave struck me as much as it did is that you can see there the inscription of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. And I pulled Hezekiah Watson's enlistment or company muster roll forms there. He was wounded at the assault on Battery Wagner. He worked later on as a barber in Mercersburg, survives the war, but dies of disease not long after. And thinking about Hezekiah Watson, thinking about Jacob Christie's letter, really, in my mind, solidifies what was really at stake in those 4 years. And we can think about the Battle of Gettysburg, the fighting that took place here in South Central Pennsylvania. But there's a larger battle that is going on. There's a lot more at stake. And men like Jacob Christie and Hezekiah Watson and some of these other soldiers here in Zion Union Cemetery recognized that. I want to stop by just finish up here by just talking a little bit about the tour that we did. So these are the stops. This is the route that we took when we did this as a bus tour. Started in Gettysburg. The first X there north of Gettysburg is Bendersville, talking about Catherine Payne. The furthest north X is the farm of Daniel Kaufman, back down here towards Caledonia State Park and Thaddeus Stevens Iron Works out to Chambersburg and then down to Mercersburg and back. And this was a full day tour. It was a long drive, but a very important one. And again, we just sort of scratched the surface of some of these important stories. And here are some images from that tour that we did back in fall of 2009. We're all unmasked. This is before masks came commonplace, but we that top left picture is us out in Zion Union Cemetery with some representatives from their friends group, the group that cares for the cemetery. The picture below that is in front of the Elkhorn Inn in Bendersville, talking about Catherine Payne. The photo in the top right-hand corner is where Daniel Kaufman's farm was. And then, of course, below that, Thaddeus Stevens blacksmith shop down in Caledonia. So all of these spots can be visited by you. Maybe someday we'll get to where we can do another bus tour. But I'm gonna end it there and open it up to see if there are any questions that have come through.
All right, thanks very much, Peter. I think we have a few questions coming in.
All right. Hang on, let me get my screen big here. Somebody asked.
I can read these to you. Sorry.
Somebody asked, do you recommend a Seminary Ridge membership or a Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable membership? Oh boy, you're putting me on the spot here because I'm involved in both organizations. I recommend a membership to both. I do. I really both are very, very worthwhile organizations and do a lot of good work. The money that your membership at Seminary Ridge Museum goes to helping preserve the building, goes to help with a lot of our educational programs that we've gone digital with over the last year, and helps us keep doing the great work that we're doing. So I would recommend both. And the other part of that question is the cupola still open? Yes, it is. The cupola is open for tours. Right now we are open 2 days a week, Saturday and Sunday from 9 to 5. Starting March 1st, we will be open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Are all the soldiers in Zion Cemetery identified on their headstones? Great job, Pete. I believe that they are. A lot of the headstones are in need to be cleaned. There is a very vibrant friends group, but like any friends group, any nonprofit, money is always an issue. So I actually have not spoken to anybody there in a while, and probably over a year now, but I know that they were applying for grants to keep up the cemetery. But as far as I know, they have identified the graves there. Discuss whether or not the Dobbin House was really used as an Underground Railroad station. I have seen solid arguments on both sides of the issue. So have I. Again, that's like any of those, and a lot of spots. It's, what do you believe? Where is the stories that are passed down through generations? This little cubby hole here was a place where they hid the freedom seekers. We're not really sure. But something about the Dobbin House, I didn't mention this, but I talked briefly about Hiram Wirtz, who lives out there in Quincy, just south of the intersection of 997 and Route 30. Hiram Wirtz says that he takes over his Underground Railroad operations from Matthew Dobbin in 1845, who I believe is the son of Alexander. I think that would work because he would have been older. So the Dobbin family, who I believe at one point were slave owners, then moved towards more practical anti-slavery. So there's that. But so yeah, sorry, Scott. I unfortunately can't really shed too much light on that.
That's an interesting question. I think when I was in middle school, or maybe earlier, my family took me to the Dobbin frequently. It was just, anyway.
Yeah.
I won't do a commercial for them, but
it's a great place. Try the French onion soup. Yeah. It's delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. But I wrote a letter as an enslaved person who stopped in that location, and I included pictures with the letter. I mean, it was a school project, but that's a very interesting question. We actually have a question that came in the Q&A. I don't know if you saw it, but
yeah, go.
Was it common for states to recruit outside of the home state?
That's a good question. You do see men joining up from different states, not necessarily joining up from the state that they lived in or were born in. I'm not sure how common it was to send recruiters out. States were getting quotas, so you need to fill that quota, and I think that there were different ways that you could fill that quota. So I wouldn't be surprised, but yeah, there are two regiments, in fact, the 54th and the 55th Massachusetts. The younger brother that you don't hear as much, but there are so many men that are recruited for the 54th Massachusetts that there's a second regiment that is formed, and a lot of these men, you see men from Franklin County in the 55th Massachusetts too. So, but again, those are the first, the very, very early ones, and there had been desire for among the African American population, a desire to join up very early in the war, and they couldn't, as a result of the prejudices in the United States government, the United States Army. So this was really this is something that they really wanted to do. Got a couple of questions. 17 guys in the 54th were from Lancaster and York County. Zion Hill Cemetery has a handful of their graves in Columbia. Yeah, thanks, Scott. And there's a I don't know if I have it in my notes here. Oh, the Columbia Spy. writes, there's an article, "Our town was the scene of more excitement than it had witnessed since the memorable departure of the bold militia for Harrisburg last fall. Large crowd collected at about Blacksbridge Hotel to witness the departure." These are as African Americans are leaving. Scott, I might have actually found that in one of your books. So you probably know of that. But yeah, they're recruiting from all over. Did Daniel Kaufman continue his involvement in the Underground Railroad after his legal issues? No. I saw that I think it's in his obituary that he said that they said, he didn't say it in his obituary, that he never did work on the Underground Railroad again. Funny about Dan Kaufman though, he dies in 1902, and he's sort of this kind of local legend in his later years, and there are these articles that are written about him on his 80-something birthday, and of course in his obituary. And you have to wonder sometimes towards the end what's true and what's fiction, what's been sort of blown up. But one of the stories about Dan Kaufman is that in 1863, as Robert Rhodes' division was marching from Carlisle towards Heidlersburg/Gettysburg, right before the Battle of Gettysburg, that it's said that Dan Kaufman went up to the mountain above Mount Holly Springs and fired down a couple of times on the Confederates and then ran away. Again, we don't know if that's true, but it's sort of, it may be in his character, but it's just an interesting thing to think about, that 20 years later he would be doing that, or 15 years later.
Peter, I was actually curious. Did you ever see like the amount of money he was fined adjusted for inflation, just to put it into perspective?
I have not. It was $5,000 at the time. That's the fines and the legal fees, but I'm not sure how that. If anybody wants to do the math, what that is in 2021 dollars. It didn't wipe him out though. By the 1860 census, he has $6,000 in property and $700 in real estate. And then by 1880, he builds this really beautiful house there on Front Street in Boiling Springs, which is still there. So he survived, I think, based on the fact that his brother-in-law pays some of the fines, and that these collections come in. And I don't know how much money comes in the collections, but interesting that it doesn't wipe him out.
I just did a rough calculation, and it looks like it was probably more than $150,000. So it's, certainly enough to wipe out, a farmer of average or modest means.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I'm going to add that to my notes for the next time I do this presentation.
Yeah, it always helps me, because it's like, well, that doesn't seem like a lot, but it probably was.
Right.
Are there any further questions at this point? I don't see any in the Q&A.
And if anybody has anything that pops to mind or want to continue the conversation in any way, please feel free to shoot me an email, pmiele@seminaryridge.org. I'm always around. Won't be there tomorrow, of course, because of the snow, but I'll be working from home. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I learned a lot of things that I thought I knew enough about and didn't. So that's always a good sign, I suppose, for me. But thank you very much. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Please don't forget, we have a program next month, again on the 17th of March this time. So please remember that, and please check our website. Again, I'm going to promote our new ArcGIS story map on the Underground Railroad. We're very happy to put that up. It's a long time in coming. We've been talking about doing it for quite some time. So if you're interested in that topic,
I'm going to spend some time on that tomorrow.
it's fun. And it keeps occurring, and this is just
Mhm.
like kind of off the cuff, but I've been talking to some people from other area regional historical societies who are we're all kind of working in silos to an extent. And it would be interesting if we could ever get together to try to do some sort of a regional project, but I'm just shooting, that's like off the cuff. So I
Well,
don't know.
and that I'll respond off the cuff, and that's been my experience too, is that you have these sites in counties that are sort of restricted by political boundary, county boundaries, and that you really do need to look at this story as a regional story, that these are interconnected. And it's just getting out of that silo and trying to work together. So we'll be in touch.
All right.
All right.
Sounds good. I think at that point, I'm going to let everybody go for the night. And don't forget, there's a talk tomorrow night about the cabal against George Washington at 7 p.m. on Zoom and Facebook Live. All right. Take care.
Take care.
And enjoy the snow.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.